There's so much happening in U.S. politics right now. President Trump has announced he will send troops to Portland, Oregon to handle, quote, domestic terrorists. A government shutdown could come Wednesday, and the Trump administration is threatening large-scale layoffs of federal workers if that happens. And one of Trump's most vocal critics, former FBI Director James Comey, has been indicted by the Justice Department. Comey said in a video message that he's innocent.
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump, but we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either.
And that's just some of what's going on. Joining me now is NPR senior national political correspondent Mara Liasson. Hi, Mara.
Hi there.
So first, what's the latest about that intended troop deployment to Portland?
Well, Trump posted that he is allowing the military to use, quote, full force if necessary. He said they're being sent to Portland to protect, quote, war-ravaged Portland. It's not completely clear what they're going to do there, and the mayor says there's no need for troops. The city is doing just fine. But, of course, he's sent federal troops to other places like Washington, D.C. and L.A. and threatened to do it in Chicago. So yet another Democratic-controlled city getting the military from Trump.
Okay, well, let's talk about James Comey. He's charged with one count of making false statements and one count of obstruction of justice, and this is stemming from testimony he gave to Congress in 2020. His guilt or innocence aside, what's the significance of these charges?
The significance is that they came at the specific demand of the president. Legal experts say this is a tipping point that Trump has now bulldozed through the post-Watergate reforms, all sorts of norms and rules that were put in place after the Watergate scandal to protect the Justice Department from political interference from the president. And the reforms were meant to send a message to the American people that prosecutions would be based on evidence and facts, not on whether someone is the enemy of the president. But Donald Trump has a different view of the Department of Justice. He calls himself the chief law enforcement official of the country. On the campaign trail last year, he said he would use the Department of Justice to prosecute his enemies, and that's what he's doing.
Comey in his video after the indictment said, let's have a trial. So how strong is the case against him?
Legal experts say the case is weak. The former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia wouldn't file it. Trump then fired him and appointed a lawyer named Lindsay Halligan as the acting U.S. attorney. She's never prosecuted a case before. But convicting Comey isn't necessarily the goal here. Legal experts say the goal really is to send a message to all of Trump's opponents that he can bankrupt them, ruin their reputation, and cost them their careers. So domination is really the point.
Well, Friday afternoon, the president was asked who's next on his list, and he denied having a list, but he did post some names last week on social media, not just Comey, but California Senator Adam Schiff and New York Attorney General Letitia James.
That's right. The president said this isn't revenge, but when he described why he was doing it, it sounded a lot like revenge. Here's what he said.
Well, that's what they tried to do, right? They did it with me for 4 years. They went after me. They went after me for 4 years.
He also signed an executive order designating Antifa as a terrorist organization and telling the government to go after other domestic terrorists. He has suggested that billionaire philanthropist George Soros could be investigated, in addition to other progressive groups and organizations like the Ford Foundation. The New York Times is reporting that the Department of Justice has issued a subpoena for Fani Willis. She's the Fulton County, Georgia district attorney who charged Trump with trying to overturn the 2020 election. And this comes after Trump has gone after other institutions and organizations that he sees as his adversaries, law firms, universities, media organizations. His top official, Stephen Miller, in the White House has called the Democratic Party a domestic extremist organization. So this is very wide-ranging.
I want to talk to you about, because we're talking about keeping the government funded, possible shutdown. What's happening in regards with those efforts to avoid a government shutdown and keep the government funded past Tuesday?
Well, the top leaders of Congress are going to the White House tomorrow. The big four congressional leaders, Senate Majority Leader Thune, Senate Minority Leader Schumer, House Speaker Johnson, and House Minority Leader Jeffries, they're all going to be talking about a shutdown, but they don't have a lot of time. There's there's a September 30th deadline to approve legislation or face a partial government shutdown. Democrats say they won't vote for a funding bill unless Obamacare subsidies, which allow millions of people to buy health insurance, are extended.
That's NPR senior national political correspondent Mara Eliason. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
President Trump also has a meeting tomorrow with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss a new U.S. plan to end the Gaza war. The war is intensifying, with an Israeli ground invasion into Gaza City fully underway. As NPR's Carrie Kahn reports, this latest offensive is unlikely to deal Hamas the final blow that Netanyahu wants.
During Israel's nearly 2-year war in Gaza, Netanyahu has repeatedly declared Hamas's imminent defeat.
אנחנו בדרך לניצחון מוחלט. הניצחון הוא בהישג יד.
We are on the path to absolute victory, within reach, just months away, he said back in February 2024. Israeli forces were preparing to assault Rafah in Gaza's south, what Netanyahu then called Hamas's last stronghold. Rafah was razed, more than 1 million people were displaced, yet Hamas continued on, as did Netanyahu's repeated total victory claims, subsequent offenses, deadly airstrikes, and ground attacks. Nearly all of Gaza's population has since been displaced, most left without adequate food or safe shelter. The death toll now passing 65,000, a third killed are children, according to Gaza's health ministry.
We're not done yet.
Friday, at a speech at the UN, Netanyahu once again claimed total victory is near.
The final elements, the final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. They vow to repeat the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again, no matter how diminished their forces.
Israel will, quote, finish the job as fast as possible, Netanyahu said to a small crowd remaining in the UN assembly. Delegates from dozens of countries had walked out as Netanyahu prepared to speak. Despite intense international pressure and even his top general saying Hamas is sufficiently weakened, Netanyahu presses on. But total victory over Hamas is not militarily possible, says Michael Milstein, an Israeli analyst and former intelligence officer.
This is not a strategy. This is a slogan. Strategy must be more complicated. And unfortunately, today, we do not get any answers or serious answers.
Even as Israel moves into Gaza City with what could be one of the largest forces to date, estimates run as high as 100,000 troops, Milstein says Hamas will take heavy losses, but they will not surrender.
Because after 2 years, it didn't happen. So why do you believe that even after an operation, the current one in Gaza, Hamas will be changed? It won't happen.
They will most likely regroup as a guerrilla force, he says, especially, he adds, since Israeli troops will stay and occupy the city. Netanyahu and his far-right coalition have signaled troops will not retreat as they did in previous operations. That greatly worries Gaza resident Mohammed Amir, who just recently fled his home in the north and is now living in what Israel says is a humanitarian zone, which he says has been hit recently by airstrikes. He's cobbled together a tent for his wife, children, and his adult daughter and her family. This war has become bigger than just beating Hamas, which has no local support, he says. Israel is using Hamas as a pretext to do what it really wants to do, displace Palestinians from Gaza once and for all, he says. Israel's ordered all of Gaza City's nearly 1 million residents south. The military says the majority have fled, but hundreds of thousands still remain. It's leveled wide swaths of eastern neighborhoods, and tanks have been seen approaching deeper into Gaza City. Across the border in Egypt, retired Army general and military expert Samir Rahib says there are an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 Hamas fighters in Gaza City. They still have access to arms, ammunition, and can recycle unexploded ordnance, but he says they're no match for Israel's vast troop numbers.
طبعا الحشد القتالي لا يتناسب مع قوة حماس بالمناسبة.
Of course, Israel outstrips Hamas, he says. And he notes, even at the start of the war, when Hamas was much stronger, Israel didn't deploy such a large force into a heavily populated city. Israeli military spokesman Nadav Shoshani insists there are still Hamas military targets to clear in Gaza City, including a vast underground tunnel network, which he says is operational.
We're ready to keep fighting for as long as we need to. Hamas needs to be removed from power, disarmed, and the hostages need to be released.
Many of the remaining 48 held in Gaza, 20 believed to still be alive, might be in Gaza City, which worries the hostages' families greatly. And there's no telling if Gaza City is really Israel's final battleground. In his speech Friday at the UN, Netanyahu even corrected himself.
Just look at what we're doing now in Gaza City, the last Hamas stronghold, one of the two last strongholds.
Signaling the war's goalpost could move once again. Carrie Khan, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
September 30th is the last day the government is fully funded, unless Congress takes action. It's also the last day to switch over your tax refunds, Social Security, and other federal payments to online direct deposit. Starting next week, the government will only issue paper checks for rare exceptions. This follows an executive order President Trump signed in March. Electronic payments are faster to process and can better protect from theft, but there's still a fraction of the population that prefers or requires a physical check. Here to explain is Kathleen Romig from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. She was also a former Social Security administrator. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So just how many people are left who haven't switched over to direct deposit already?
Well, in Social Security, well over 99% of beneficiaries are already getting electronic payments. That's the product of really decades of work by the government to make sure that beneficiaries are getting electronic payments whenever possible. But when you look at a program like Social Security, just a fraction of 1% of Social Security beneficiaries adds up to hundreds of thousands of people. So that's what we're dealing with now.
Who are these people? Like, what types of communities are we talking about who are still getting these paper checks?
It tends to be the most marginalized people who are, for example, unbanked or homeless or really struggle with digital tools. It tends to be very old beneficiaries who have been receiving benefits for a long time.
So we know that recently the Social Security Administration has had some difficulties. There have been staffing cuts, which has led to longer wait times, and people are being unable to reach a human when they're trying to call. So how will that affect this Tuesday deadline?
So there are online tools that people can use to either request a waiver or to set up an electronic payment, but those tools might not work for the people who are the hardest to reach. And so for those people, it might be that they need a bit of hand-holding, a bit of in-person assistance. And it's pretty hard to get through to the Social Security Administration on the phone these days. It takes over an hour. And it can be really hard to get a person to help you at a local field office.
So what type of exemptions is the government making for those that may have difficulty switching over? Like, how would you qualify for an exemption?
Yes, the government is still providing exemptions in dire need situations, people who truly can't access the banking system, and also the oldest of beneficiaries. And there is a way to apply for a waiver. That's through the Treasury Department. Otherwise, they are going to need to sign up for a direct deposit payment, or if they don't have a bank, then sign up for what's called a Direct Express card. It's sort of like a debit card where their benefits will be deposited each month.
And so when you say some of the oldest beneficiaries, how old is old?
Beneficiaries who are over 90 years old may qualify for an exemption.
The Treasury Department is saying that, switching to electronic payments will save money because it costs more to issue a paper check. It's about 50 cents to issue a paper check, versus only 15 cents for electronic funds. Was there a real need to make this change? Did it have to happen now?
So it is on average, of course, cheaper to issue an electronic payment than a paper check. But when we're talking about reaching the people who are the hardest to reach, when that might require multiple phone calls or an in-person visit to help navigate the process, the cost-benefit analysis might not work out the same. The other thing is the Social Security Administration has been strongly encouraging and even requiring electronic payments for many years now for new beneficiaries. So there is a question about whether it really makes sense to expend all of this additional effort in order to move just that last fraction of a percent onto electronic payments when so many people are getting electronic payments already.
If you're a person who is, or you know someone who is still getting a paper check and they're having difficulties getting direct deposit, do they have to worry about getting their money after this deadline?
So the Social Security Administration spokespeople have been saying that they're not going to discontinue people's checks. If they did, that really would be a catastrophe for many of these people because, again, these are the most marginalized people who really rely on those benefits in order to make ends meet.
The federal government will run out of funding on September 30th if Congress does not pass a spending bill. There will be a government shutdown. Would that affect this electronic payment deadline?
As far as I know, it would not. The Social Security benefits themselves are paid during government shutdowns. Those are not subject to the annual appropriations process. And historically, the Social Security offices and the 800 number have also stayed open even during a government shutdown. Now, we don't know that for sure because the Trump administration hasn't put out its contingency plans for a shutdown this year yet, but that's what's always happened in the past.
That's Kathleen Romig with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Taking Tylenol is not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good.
That's President Trump last week linking the active ingredient in Tylenol to autism. If you're pregnant, he says, don't take it. And to be clear, there is no established causal link between acetaminophen and autism. And having the President of the United States go out and make a claim like that can just add to the real struggle of navigating pregnancy. There's a lot of information to take in. As a mother of 3, I know. So we've called on Judette Louis to remind us all of some of the scientifically supported do's and don'ts. She's an obstetrician and the dean of Old Dominion University School of Medicine. Dr. Louis, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with acetaminophen. Give us your characterization of President Trump's advice there and tell us if this notion is a new thing or if it's been around for a while.
Yes, acetaminophen is available over the counter because overall it's been demonstrated to be safe for short-term use. The concerns about its link with autism or neurodevelopmental disabilities has been studied for more than 2 decades. So it's not a new concern. But the better designed studies, the ones that accounted for family history and looking at siblings, found that there's no association.
And isn't acetaminophen also used to reduce fevers? Isn't that important during a pregnancy?
Absolutely. If the fever is high and in the first trimester, there's a higher chance of birth defects related to it. I think the mistake that people make is that they say, oh, there's a harm to the use of a medication, but they don't compare it to the harm of not treating the condition that you are using the medication for.
And let's talk about pain relief generally, because pregnancy, I'm not even talking about childbirth, can be very uncomfortable. I mean, women can be in a horrible, excruciating pain of the joints and the muscles. I mean, how do you tell your patients to deal with pain?
You can start with things such as massage and heat and, different ointments that exist over the counter. But the reality is that if a woman has pain that needs to be treated, that Tylenol is accepted as the first line treatment. We also know that there are risks to not treating pain because there are hormones that your body releases in response to pain. Not to mention there's also the mental health component for the mothers. One of the concerns is that this announcement further plays into a societal push for women to just tough it out for their babies.
And so, what about vaccines? What do people need to know about COVID vaccines during pregnancy? Because obviously there's been some information coming from Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy that has raised questions about that.
I am an obstetrician, high-risk obstetrician. I am a scientist, first and foremost. I believe science. And the data is very clear that when you are pregnant, if you get infected with a virus, you are more likely to have severe disease, whether we're talking about COVID or influenza. It's flu season. There's an associated risk with preterm birth with those conditions, and unfortunately, more likely to die from viral infection.
We spoke with Dr. Edwin Asturias after he was removed from the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, and here's how that conversation ended.
What we can tell you as former ACIP members is that we, as well as many of your pediatricians, obstetricians, family providers, and so forth, will be making sure that the public knows what is needed in terms of protection for themselves and their families.
Now, he did not say that people shouldn't trust the CDC, but that was in June, and a lot has happened since then. What's your take on official government guidance now in late September, and how should the public think about it?
The scientific community and the scientific organizations, we are very clear about our recommendations, and they're based on science. I think what's happening now is that the guidance coming out from these federal agencies has a different voice. I do think that some of the guidance now is infused by anecdotes, and that is swaying things more about why the recommendations are made. So
who should patients listen to? What do you tell your patients about where to seek guidance?
I would prefer that they listen to the scientists. I know American Academy of Pediatrics is making the information available for pregnancy, American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists, and Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine. They all have patient-facing materials to help educate patients.
So you are speaking to us in your personal capacity. You're not speaking on behalf of Old Dominion University. But what do you tell your medical students?
There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there related to health and truly related to everything. And so I try to tell my medical students that a lot of patients want to be part of the decision making, and they want to have a non-judgmental conversation, and we have to equip our students to be able to have those conversations.
That's Judette Louis. She's a board-certified obstetrician who specializes in high-risk pregnancy. Dr. Louis, thank you so much.
Thank you.